Hey, welcome to Right in the Gut podcast. I'm your host, Kenda Rigdon, and my guest here today is Chris Voutsas. He is the founder of Shield of Health, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about him before I just let him get started and take it away. He is currently a functional health consultant. He guides others to healing from chronic illness, and he uses mitochondrial health as the basis for everything. He graduated with a BS in biological sciences from Arizona State University. He has a medical certificate in drug abuse and substance counseling and a master's in medical nutrition. He is currently pursuing his doctorate at Arizona State in behavioral health. So, Chris, take it away.
How's it going? Thank you so much for having me on and everything.
Absolutely. It's so wonderful to have you. Thank you for being with us. Why don't you share with us a little bit about your background? Kind of where did you kind of go through your journey to end up
Yeah.
as the founder of Shield of Health and in the health and wellness space?
Yeah. All right. We're doing the origin story, that means. So, the origin story for me started when I was a baby, actually. So, when I was a baby, and we can't say it definitively, but I think that enough factors add up to where you're like, okay, maybe that is the reason. But after I got what I would call experimental injections as an infant, I had 40 plus life-threatening food allergies, such severe asthma that if I slept on a pillow at a hotel, I would have an asthma attack and I would have to be rushed to the emergency room. Such bad eczema that it would be from head to toe, and I would have to wrap myself in these wraps with Vanny cream around it almost every night. Super uncomfortable.
Wow.
And in addition to that, every time I would walk outside with an antihistamine, my whole body would break out into hives just from like existing. And that was the state of my health that I knew when I entered into the world. Like I was just used to it. I was like, okay, this is going to happen now. And I even remember as a kid, there was one time where I went to Florida specifically, and my hay fever and allergies got so severe that they thought I had like whooping cough. And they were like,
Oh,
no, you
wow.
actually don't. That's how severe it got.
Wow.
So I went from like doctor to doctor to doctor, probably like over 10 of them, I remember. And it was just after every visit, they were like, we have no idea what to do with you. Then when I was in the fourth grade, we went to Colorado to one of like the top allergy facilities in the country. And they were like, yeah, we don't really know what to do with you. And it was kind of just like a scavenger hunt for that my whole childhood, and it was difficult, like, sleeping in other kids' houses, petting dogs, petting cats, whatever it may be, like, it made life very difficult growing up at that age, so, from a very young age, as that kid who wasn't able to process everything that was happening, I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna go and be a doctor one day, and I'm gonna go and help people with their health because my entrance into the world has shown me from the very beginning what that feels like. So for me, I had that chip on my shoulder from a very young age, and I always knew that I wanted to go to med school. So I tried very hard in high school and I did my thing and I tried to get like active so I could obviously prepare for university and whatnot. And then I went to Arizona State University and I wanted to be pretty relentless about going to med school. So I did like tons of shadowing, did very well on the MCAT, devoted tons of time to it. I think it was like a 4.2 GPA. I did really well throughout my studies. I worked in a lab, like several different labs over the course of 4 to 5 years. And I just like studied research, I even started a student organization on how to like actually read and interpret research and not just like read the conclusions section and say, yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And then did some stuff with like the volunteer orgs there. So I did a lot to get as involved as possible and to make myself like a very high quality medical school applicant. And I still had that goal of being like the best physician that I possibly could when I stepped into my career. So that was the goal for a while. And obviously, freshman year, that was the goal. Sophomore year, that was the goal. And then I get to junior year, and it's still the goal. And it was even the goal my senior year, too. But the problem is that during my junior year, I got so sick that, and obviously, like during my childhood, I still had a lot of those issues, but I was able to do things that kind of like somewhat mitigated it or made myself like be allowed to be a functional student for the time. I would still have to take like the antihistamine every day, and I would still have to like work out and do obviously like good things for my health. But when I went to college, things seemed to like really hit the fan. I still remember my junior year. I was vomiting stomach acid. If I would eat like applesauce, a rice cake, like I couldn't eat anything other than applesauce and rice cakes for 30 days straight at one period of time, I remember. And keep in mind, that was actually in the beginning of when I was trying to study for the MCAT. So that is like quite a terrible thing because that test isn't obviously the easiest thing to be taken. I was vomiting stomach acid and I was bedridden. And this is while I was doing like the Zoom University when they had like some of the online classes, so I was able to work. But I was like, what do I do here actually? Like this is kind of a big problem and I'm vomiting stomach acid. So I say, okay, maybe I'll go to the GI doctor, I'll go to my primary care, and I go through them. And kind of what happens is I just get cycled from like GI doctor back to primary care, back to GI doctor, 4 month wait for the next specialist. And just through those months, it kind of like put me through a living hell of like, what is happening to me? And how do I figure out what is happening? And through my head, that was giving me like tons of cognitive dissonance because I was like, I'm here with the complex issue and it can't be resolved by the people that I'm likely to be going to school with. So that was a big issue that sat with me. And the more and more that I shadowed, the more I was like, these people are actually really cool. Like, I like talking to them. They seem to really care. And I was like, I don't think it's the people. I think it's the system. I think it's the fact that maybe you're getting 30 to 60 people in a day that you're seeing, and you're limited to maybe 15 minutes. And during that 15 minutes, to make the most of your time, you have to follow a very specific way of thinking that's very algorithmic. And in a way, it's kind of like you're taking the art of what it means to heal and help somebody heal, and you're just removing it away and deducing it to only a science. For me, on my end, I saw that very early on, and I was kind of able to recognize that pattern. And I was like, okay, maybe I will still go to med school. So I kept going, and I was like, maybe I can be like, maybe I can start like a private practice or something. I still remember to this day, I was like calling a bunch of people about the ideas and everything to like see what was feasible and what wasn't. But basically, what happened is after I took the MCAT and even leading up to it, I started to realize like, what do I do to get myself healthier during this time? So I started navigating the literature myself because I was obviously like pretty sufficient at reading research. So what I did is I started looking into like the circadian literature, and all I did was just walk during the sunrise to the library. And it was like a pretty decent walk too, but that's all I did. I'll just start walking with the sun rising, like to the library to study for my MCAT. And within probably like 3 weeks, I noticed like a very notable shift. And then after that, I started obviously removing certain foods from my diet and seeing like, are these a problem? Even though every single professional I had went to told me that that was a stupid idea, I was like, well, I'm kind of looking for answers here, so I'm going to try the stupid idea. So I tried the stupid idea, quote unquote, and I got myself like pretty close to remission where I was able to study for the test. And that's when I was able to obviously do well and then advance that next part. But that entire time that I was studying for the test, I had like this feeling and this intuitive feeling where I'm like, I don't know if this is right for me. Like, I don't know if I should be pursuing this at this point after everything that I've just gone through here. So I kept doing it. I took the test. And then after I took the test, right before I was about to do primary applications, I was like, there's something off. And I felt like this really strong intuitive pull. And I was like, I was kind of pissed. Like, I'm a believer in God. And I was like, God, like, are we really about to do this right now? Like, are you serious after all this work that I put in? And he's like, yeah. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I'm going to roll with it. And we're going to see what happens. I'm going to trust, but I'm very unhappy right now that after all of that, like, I got to throw everything out the door kind of. So I did that, and I said that very day, if you can't beat the system, make your own. And from that point on, that is what the goal was to basically turn into Shield of Health. So from that point forward, when I realized that if I can't beat the system for these complex and multifaceted issues, clearly somebody has to make their own. And nowadays, like if I do a discovery call with somebody, it's often longer than their actual visit with whoever they're going to, which is saying something about the system in and of itself alone. So for me, I was obviously going through this, and I was just a student at the time who had just gotten out of undergraduate. I was like, what do I do from here, basically? Like, I know the circadian stuff a little bit. Maybe I know a little bit of like the dietary things, but what do I do from here? And at the time, I was like 21, 22 years old. So I'm like, I think I was like even 20 or 21, but I was like, got the rest of my life from here. So like, what do I really do? So from that point forward, I was very dedicated to the mission. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but it's going to happen one day. I'm just going to keep working toward that sort of things. What I did is I actually ended up continuing to study into the literature on some of these topics. And
Yeah.
I became a personal trainer for the time being because I was like, at least I can gain some sufficiency in my understanding of movements and I can make myself more well rounded. I can work in a health role while I'm obviously studying medical nutrition. So that is exactly what I plan to do. And I ended up doing that for the time being, and I thought that it was pretty good at first. Obviously, the medical nutrition, they'll tell you like a lot of good information, but then you'll see certain information and you'll look through it and you're like, I don't know if the LDL cholesterol is as bad as everybody's saying. And I look into it and I'm like, oh, look at this study right here. It shows that the best longevity for people, they have an LDL cholesterol level between 100 and 170. But then you go to the medical system and they say if it's above 130 or something, you're in serious trouble. And I'm like, why is there contradictions between the research and what they're actually saying in practice here? So
Mhm.
for me, it was a lot of these thoughts that kept happening over the years. And I was just thinking about every little thing and kind of thinking, if I were to build some sort of business out of that where I can help people, what would I need to do to make that as thorough as possible so that the needs are really met and so that we're being as accurate as possible? So what happened is I continued to devote myself to my learning journey and one day out of nowhere, and keep in mind that my symptoms were not the best still. Like they were still like in remission-ish, but I still had asthma for a bit. I still had eczema. I still had like just weird GI issues. I was nauseous. I could only eat like 5 foods at one point. So it was like
Mhm.
chicken, carrot, zucchini, olive oil, white rice. So I had to be
Wow.
very restricted for a while. And I was like, I'm figuring this out, we're moving through this. And this is like when I was like in the cocoon, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that and I'm working as a personal trainer. And all of the sudden, this client comes in and he's like 55, one of the healthiest dudes that I've ever seen. And he's like leg pressing 700 pounds. And I'm
Wow.
like, what do you do to like keep such good care of your health? I was so curious. And he's like, well, I actually go to this chiropractor guy. And believe it or not, but 3 years ago, I was in a wheelchair. And I'm like, huh?
Wow.
Leg pressing 700 pounds and you were in a wheelchair 3 years? I was like, wow.
Wow.
I can't believe it. So I was like, I got to go see this guy and what he's about. And I go see this guy, and I was already getting into like holistic health. So I was reading like Ben Greenfield, Ben Lynch, a lot of those
Mhm.
sorts of books, and I was like naming them all to him. And he had like this little library in his office, and he's like, "Oh, you mean this book?"
Yeah.
Book. And I'm like, wow, this guy might be me in like 20 years or something. So I keep talking to him and he educates me phenomenally on circadian health, how to
Yeah.
actually heal holistically. The fact that when you're healing holistically, it's about looking at these weakened areas of physiology and looking at what's upstream of what's downstream of what, and what can we do to support these areas to drive the body toward homeostasis. He taught me very well about that sort of concept. He taught me about mitochondrial health, redox at a very deep level, which is very nice. He taught me all about, obviously, I would say like a surface level explanation of the gut and those sorts of things. And then obviously some stuff around the nervous system. So what he really did is he gave me the tip of the iceberg to what a lot of like the important principles I look at today are. So it was good for a period of time. Like I did that stuff for probably like 4 or 5 months and
Yeah.
changed my life. Like I probably lost like 5% body fat during that time. I was able to it was like 8 months probably of doing that stuff. I got like my asthma disappeared probably 8 months into
Wow.
doing it, and it still hasn't come back to this day. My
Okay.
eczema entirely disappeared, and then the best part, 30 plus food allergies disappeared too. I
Wow.
started to be able to eat food again for the first time in years, like in ways that I hadn't before. And I was like, this is just incredible. I'm living life again, and I can understand what it feels like to enjoy life after not being able to do so for such a long period of time. So that was a part of it, and I did pretty good. But I noticed that I only got myself to like maybe 65% of the way there. Like, yeah,
Okay.
the asthma was gone. Yeah, the allergies were reduced, but nevertheless, like there's still very complex things that remain in what I was going through. And even to this day, like I'm still deathly allergic to dairy, lentil, sesame, chickpea, green pea, peanut, tree nut. So I have a few allergies to
Yeah.
this day still. But
Okay.
the cool thing is like if you look at the dairy one now, my IgE score when I was a baby was like above 100. Now it's less than 5. So
Wow.
it's a very big difference because that went from me being able to like, if I had dairy, I would go into anaphylactic shock, which I did when I was 5.
Oh, God.
Now, if somebody cooks like dairy or butter into a cookie, I could eat that and nothing would happen. So it's a very, very big difference between where I was at that earlier point and now. And that's how I can see that things are continuing to trend in that direction. But eventually I was like, there just has to be more to this. If I'm working with like a complex case going forward in the future, like how am I going to kind of address this? I know that for everybody, the answer can't just be like fix your life. I know that for everybody, like, there's gonna be more complex things that you have to do, and I knew that for myself too, because probably I would say, like, 3 months after I noticed, like, a lot of those good healing things, the GI issues started to, like, very subtly creep, and then I did this stupid thing where I fasted for, like, 72 hours, and then that literally took me from, like, this beautiful place where I had gotten rid of, like, all of that GI distress
Yeah.
to, like, 10 out of 10 symptoms again for that period of time, and then I had to restart the process a little bit over myself again, but this time around, I met my 2nd and current mentor to this day, who was an ex-medical detective who ended up doing this same line of work. And he was able to teach me this. Like, if we're talking the beginning stuff was the tip of the iceberg, he was able to go to the very bottom of the iceberg and teach me just the
Wow.
deepest levels of systems physiology, how the principles and philosophies work, how we really need to consider how these systems are kind of like an interconnected web where
Mhm.
we have to go and untangle this web a lot of the time. The fact that when you're looking at health, there's like so many feedback loops. Like I know one thing I want to talk about today is all of the patterns I see when I'm working with people. And I'll
Yep.
tell you what, like you have no idea how many feedback loops and random patterns I see in people now. And if I would have only gone with the information of the initial mentor I had, as great as he would have, I would have never been able to get that deep down the iceberg to help those very particular sorts of cases. So
Wow.
it was truly a blessing that I crossed paths with my current mentor because I was able to expedite my learning process so much. And then it got to the point where I worked with over 100 people over
Wow.
a pretty like solid amount of time. And I was able to change a lot of lives. I remember I had somebody where I worked with her and she had it was like this such bad like bone marrow damage from chemotherapy that she
Mhm.
couldn't produce saliva as like well anymore.
Mhm.
Within probably 4 months, we got her hemoglobin from 9.6 to 13, and then she
Awesome.
starts producing saliva a little bit better, life has changed, boom. So,
Okay.
big thing is, like, I work with that, and I've worked with, like, people with MCAS in the past, people with,
Yep.
like, asthma, eczema, dermatitis, terrible gut issues, like, all these really complex sorts of things where, like, when you look at that, you're like, "How can somebody actually, like, deal with that on a day-to-day basis?" So, I would
Yeah.
say, like, my average clientele during that time was some of the more complex cases that you would ever see because you got to imagine if like if you're going to this dude on the internet,
Mhm.
clearly you've probably been through the medical system,
Yes.
clearly you've
Right.
probably been through the functional space, and you're just looking for answers at this point and you're like, how are we going to put the pieces of this puzzle together? So
Right.
essentially over time I was able to work with 100 plus people, and it was
Yeah.
very nice because each and every time I was able to become that much more experienced throughout that. And eventually it did hit a point though where I was like, okay, if I'm going to give everything I have to this person in terms of
Mhm.
helping them through their nervous system, through their mitochondrial health, through educating them, through helping them with the tools
Mhm.
they need to learn to obviously continue their healing after they're done working with me. Like if I'm going to do the full picture, which my protocols can be like 25 pages sometimes,
Yep.
clearly I'm gonna burn myself out quite a bit if I'm doing this on my own for the foreseeable future. So that's when I realized, like, I need a team, and the team can't just be specialists. Like, I need a bunch of jack of all trades on my team who are very
Yeah.
sufficient in understanding systems physiology and holistic healing and how that works, because if I hire somebody who only knows what's happening with, like, movements or the fascia or something,
Mhm.
like, yeah, they're gonna be really elite at that area, but their perspective is limited to that one aspect of physiology. Whereas if they have an understanding of how fascial health is interacting with these other systems and how these other systems are interacting with fascial health, well, what you can do is you can have a way more cultivated perspective, and that can potentially change the quality of the intervention that's given. So, what I like to say is that in this line of work, there's often no perfect science. There's often an art and a science to it. So
Yeah.
bringing in jack of all trades into the business was my goal. And I was like, I will not start the company until I find those people, basically. So I sat there idly for a while and I was like, God, bring them to me whenever the time is right.
Right.
God brought them to me, and then I was
Awesome.
able to obviously assemble the company and everything, and it's much better now because instead of meeting with, like, a client once a month, they can meet with any 4 of us at basically any week, and they get, like, 4 different calls a month. They get, like, 4 different people looking at their case together and then discussing it amongst one another, and then even doing things like doing the extra effort to eliminate things like groupthink. So
Wow.
we do all of these practices to make it as thorough as we possibly can. And given that it's like a 25-page protocol sometimes, well, the other thing is like we don't expect people to know just everything to do right off the bat. The reason we have 4 people is so we can help with the integration of things. Like, if you're not actually integrating these things properly and you're giving somebody like a sheet of paper and saying, go do this, you're assuming that they know like a crazy amount about how to do that. And you don't realize how difficult it is to like actually change that behavior and rewire, obviously, the brain and how you're actually going about those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So that is basically the very long sort of story on how Shield of Health came to be and just like the whole process that led up to it. But it was like I can tell that God had his fingerprints all over this one for sure.
I love that. What a journey. Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
that. That's exciting too. And I think that in what you said, without saying it, you did get to the bottom of what is broken about our current medical system is that you oftentimes have a silo of different specialties where they're really not talking to each other. They're not working as like you
Uh-huh.
are in a team in a group think, hey, can we discuss this? There's really not time for that. And
Yes.
there's not the ability to communicate like that. Now, remember when I was learning about just medical topics in grad school and thinking, it's funny because in certain countries, they have one doctor that treats you for everything. And for example, Cuba is one of these examples. The people tend to get better health care just simply because one person knows about all the things and is connecting
Yep.
dots and getting really good at that and
Yep.
they know your story. Whereas we don't do that in the United States. And
Yeah,
I
because it's
think
a business. It's not about treating the person. Exactly.
right, right. And like, you also said, I don't think it's the doctors. I think they are good people and they have good
Correct.
heart and they really are in it for the
I
right
know so
reason.
many of them. Yes.
Yeah, same. But it's just there's only so much you can do with a system that's set up like that.
Yeah,
So I love your approach. I think it's a winning idea there.
yes. If you can't beat the system, make your own.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Well, tell me a little bit. You had mentioned about symptom patterns that you see in your clients. And, sometimes when you see the same thing over and over again, you can kind of start to see where this is going, how it started, all of that. So, can you shed some more light on that for us?
Yeah. Let me dive into like philosophy of healing and then I'll segue into that. So
Okay.
the thing is, like, I spent tens of thousands of dollars on naturopaths when I was going through my own healing journey as well. And don't get me wrong, I know some very stellar naturopaths. The problem is that many naturopathic schools aren't accredited. So you're getting a different sort of like system of beliefs with whoever you're working with, essentially. So that's why, like, if you're a consumer, it actually has to become part of your responsibility to be able to obviously educate yourself to pick you can't be like, yeah, the system's gonna save me. Like nobody's coming to save you is the truth. And like you have to be able to take this into your own hands and to say, like, I'm gonna research this stuff and I'm gonna see who I am personally aligned with as I go through this. So the thing is, like, that was obviously the thing with the naturopathic stuff, and what I noticed when I went was they would always be like, "Yeah, we just gotta check your thyroid, man. That's it. It's the thyroid. Like, that's what's causing this all," with, like, a very sincere look. And I'll be like, "Okay, we're gonna do the thyroid test," and they're like, "We're gonna fix you right up. Here's this, supplement bottle. It has around 30 supplements in it, and it's a
Right.
concoction, and it's a proprietary blend, and it's also a part of our company." So I tried taking those and spent tens of thousands of dollars, and there was yeah, it didn't let's just say that it didn't do anything. So,
Yeah.
as I was going through that, I was like, this doesn't make sense. And one thing that my second mentor taught me is that when it comes to actual health and healing, what you want to do is you want to look at the actual weakened areas of physiology within your system, and you need to work out what's upstream of what, what's downstream of what.
Yeah.
Because let's say you're only focusing, like women on menopause. This is a great example. They'll be like, it's all the hormones. There's nothing else a part of this equation that I'm experiencing right now that's contributing to this. And I'm like, that's not quite true. Like you could look at progesterone as a hormone, for example, and we know that kisspeptin neurons are very regulated by our circadian rhythm, and that'll impact your GnRH pulsality and how it impacts luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So if you're in like this perimenopause range and you're going through it, the need to get expose yourself to these circadian cues is so essential. But it becomes this thing where they're only focusing on the hormone. And they're like, can I take Vitex for this? Can I take Black Cohosh for this? Whatever it may be. And we're just focusing on the hormone, but we don't want to focus on the symptom. We want to focus on the actual system that has been weakened, that is driving the cyst symptoms in the first place. So
Hmm.
when you do it like that, you're able to get a way clearer idea of what's happening in one's physiology. So for me, the way that I like to do that is I'll look at blood chemistry very comprehensively to get quantitative data. And then I'll look at symptomology very comprehensively as well. And I'm talking like setting up 90-minute phone calls, 2-hour phone
Okay.
calls to map out like every little piece of the story. I'm talking
Wow.
like 7-year health timeline. I'm talking like
Yeah.
you need to also do a nervous system assessment. We need to assess habits. We need to assess lifestyle. Like I want to know it all because I want to know
Yeah.
exactly where in this story are things going wrong, even if
And
it's yeah.
so let me ask, what are you looking for when you're asking about history of the neurology and symptoms? They're key like patterns. You're like, okay, let me see if I can see
Yeah,
if they
so
have that.
bloating's a really good example. Let's say that
Okay.
they have like very severe bloating. Maybe like a naturopath or somebody will be like, okay, it's bloating, that's that. But for me, like, and I bet many naturopaths are like this too, like just like
Okay.
surgical with it. But for me, I'm like, that's not enough. I need to know how is the bloating on a scale of 1 to 10. Is it a gassy or a full type of bloating? Because if it were a
Okay.
gassy type of bloating, that would signify potentially more fermentation and it could potentially cue us toward like a microbial issue. Whereas if it's a more I'm full, there's food sitting in my stomach bloating, that might be something more linked to just the overall digestive process.
Yeah.
So what we obviously want to be able to differentiate between that, and I'll ask more questions. I'm like, does it happen 30 minutes after eating or 90 minutes after eating to try to get an idea of like, hey, is this
Where?
maybe happening in like the stomach or the small intestine? And
Yeah.
I want to get even deeper than that too. I want to know, is it cruciferous veggies that set you off?
Mhm.
Is there maybe a sulfur metabolism issue? Does it happen to be FODMAPs that set you off if it
Yeah.
happens? Is it steak and you notice like undigested food and stool? I want to know exactly every little detail that I can about that bloating so I can map
That's
out
good.
as much of what I possibly can. And that's how you can truly identify patterns. Because if you're
Yeah.
not gathering that information, if you're not a good detective, you'll never have the data to be able to recognize the patterns in the first place. So
Absolutely.
for me, like I do that with probably over 100 symptoms and I have them like check it off. And then two other people on the team have their own symptom checker forms and they do the
Okay.
exact same thing, but for totally different questions. So it's
Okay.
often we're almost asking like 300 different questions about random symptoms, and we're like, we're gonna get all of the data in the world
Good.
about this case, and from there, it's the blood chemistry part is definitely like one of my pieces of bread and butter, but. When I do the blood chemistry part of things, like it's not what you would think, like when you go to the doctor's office, because
Right.
we'll take fasting insulin, for example. If you have a fasting insulin of 18, many doctors' offices will tell you that that's fine. Here's the problem, though. The reference range for, or the medical reference range, the normal reference range for fasting insulin is often between 2 and 25. Do you know the problem, though? If you go to the literature and you look at objectively healthy populations, it's very common for that range for fasting insulin to fall between 2 and 6. So why is that? Don't we all
Hmm.
wonder, like, why is it that it would be between 2 and 6 versus 2 and 25? Well, I did a little bit of critical thinking on that one, and given that
Okay.
75% of Americans are known to have one or more chronic illness,
Yeah.
75% of the people being used to make that reference range pool for blood chemistry have one or more chronic illnesses. So
Yeah.
we're in a system that's comparing sick people to other sick people within
Mm,
the realm of chronic illness. And part of the reason why that is because the medical system is there to treat and diagnose disease, not necessarily what leads up to it. So
yeah.
we obviously, like, you could have insulin resistance, and that could be very much so making your physiology extremely dysfunctional. Like
Yeah.
insulin resistance could literally dysregulate your androgens, and for a woman that could cause, or it could contribute to things like PCOS. So we
Yeah.
know that insulin resistance and having issues with that too, of course, that's gonna mess with things like your energetics, how you're feeling throughout the day. It's in some studies, I think, it can negatively modulate gut bacteria. So there's all of these different effects that can happen throughout the body. But if the person getting those labs done is never told that that's a problem in the first place because it came back normal, well, they're
Right.
never going to be able to work on that area or have an idea that they should be working on that area. So when I look at,
So,
yeah, yeah.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
When I look at labs, I want to very specifically go off of what is the optimal reference range. When I'm going into the literature, I need to see that it's from a healthy population, not from like the normal curve or any of that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Because what we're doing is we're trying to look at what are weakened areas of physiology. We're not treating and diagnosing disease. That's what doctors do. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, Chris, like, what is this skin issue that I have? I'm going to say, I don't know. Go to the doctor. They're going to treat and diagnose that for you. And then they're probably going to propose that you take this crappy steroid cream. And then that's going to be their solution. So maybe you can come back here and I'll look at your weakened areas of physiology and we'll see what we do. So that's kind of how the overall like systems physiology philosophy operates and how I like to actually get that data and how I can recognize these patterns within the first place. Because what I do see in the space is, I'll give a really good example. There are certain practitioners who will just straight up like Dunning Kruger themselves at times. I had a client once, and they told me that they were convinced that they had parasites because their naturopath said said so. And I
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
okay, can I see like the lab and the interpretation and like the reason why they would say that sort of thing? And they were like, yeah, they basically said that because I had raised EBV antibodies, I had parasites.
Okay.
Epstein-Barr virus, keep in mind.
Right.
He was trying to reason
Oh,
that because you had Epstein-Barr
hmm.
antibodies, you had parasites. And that's when I was like, wow, this
Okay.
is this is how important the diagnostics process is.
Yeah.
Because you'll go to somebody and they'll speak to you with full-on conviction, and they'll be
Right.
like, "You have this," or "You might have this," without doing a good diagnostics process. And for that person, when I told them that they did not have parasites and it was more so a chronic viral load, they were like, "Thank you so much."
Yeah.
It's because, like, the way that you would help with that too, it can be different in certain
Yeah.
respects
Right.
too. So, it's a big thing, and that's why you kinda have to be, like, so on it and so thorough when you're
Yeah.
investigating these sorts of patterns, I would argue.
So that leads me to my question from earlier
Yeah.
is you were mentioning about, and you had mentioned Ben Lynch. Do you, in your blood work, suggest that people get like any kind of genetic testing,
All the
for
time.
example, for like the polymorphisms, the MTHFR, and all of
Yes.
that?
Yeah, because obviously, like, methylation, that's gonna majorly impact your gene expression. So, like,
Right.
if I'm working with somebody and they're like, "Yeah, I've had these issues kinda, like, since childhood," I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, you probably have a genetic component if that's the case." Like, in the health
Yeah.
space, they like to believe that genes aren't as relevant. I think that can be due to just, like, maybe a personal bias in a lot of people, but I do think that genes are very relevant, especially with
Absolutely.
how they express themselves. Like,
Hmm.
genetics, they're the gun itself.
Yeah.
They put your finger on the trigger, your lifestyle pulls it. So,
Yeah.
the thing is, like, when I'm looking at genes, and if somebody has, like, super low homocysteine, and I'm looking at, like, their MTHFR, their MTR, their MTRR, and I'm looking at all of those, if
Right.
I don't have that data, it's kind of like you're playing a game of Tetris with your B vitamins. So, you obviously wanna know pretty well, like, how somebody might be prone to methylating and those sorts
Right.
of specific factors to kinda make the piece of the puzzle more simple for yourself because in my opinion, like it should be beneficial to eliminate as much guesswork as we possibly can in this.
Right.
So if somebody's and the other thing, obviously, like in this line of work, is you want to see like can the person afford it? Are they able to do that? Because insurance doesn't cover stuff in that. So you always want to think through those sorts of things as well. But yeah, I do think that gene tests are very good. Would you want to dive into some of the patterns that I see?
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Let's do it. So let's start with a really fun one. So one really common thing that I see is when somebody has like candida or a fungal
Uh-huh,
overgrowth, it's
uh-huh,
often very common for them to have like these cravings, wanting to binge eat all the time. They just can't stop eating sugar. And it's just more than that too. You'll often look at their GI map and you'll see that they're often low in the lactic acid producing bacteria
okay,
like bifidobacteria, like lactobacillus, they're often very low in those. And kind of what happens is candida has two different forms. It has a commensal form where it can just exist in your gut and it's a big chiller and it's like, hey guys, I'm just here, I'm helping out. And then it can turn into the hyphae form. I call it the evil form of candida. So basically, in order to set the stage for that to happen, that hyphae form really likes it when you have a very oxygenated environment in the gut
okay,
and when you have a very alkaline environment in the gut. So another
mhm,
very common thing that I'll see with candida is the person will have like low stomach acid or just
mhm,
some sort of like general digestion issue. And I know for me
mhm,
in the past, like given that I was on the antihistamine my whole life, that is blocking some very important
yeah,
physiological processes for stomach acid production. So for me, I was like, it made sense. So I had candida from the sixth grade until I was 20. So I think in a lot of those sorts of cases, you can look through it very deeply and you can kind of see like here are the nuance and here's why it's like so important to actually go in and support this area of somebody's physiology. Like it's easy to say like, yeah, we got to work on stomach acid and bile flow, but it's a lot easier when you're actually able to look at that on a deeper level and say, this is kind of why we need to be doing that. In addition to that, one other thing that I noticed is, in my case at least, this was a big sort of like revelation I had. Candida
yeah,
can make like your T helper cell 2 dominance worse. So here's the thing, right? With our immune system, it kind of needs to act like a seesaw. You have T helper cell 2, you have T helper cell 1/17, you have the T reg in there. So we want
uh-huh,
it to be like this nice balanced seesaw ideally. But when you get experimental injections where they're adding antibodies to your system at a very young age while your immune system is developing, that can somehow skew it toward this direction. So that's a big problem, right? Because this T helper cell 2 side of your immune system, it mainly evolved for the allergic response, parasites, those sorts of things.
uh-huh,
Now, the T helper cell 1/17 side of the immune system, that evolved to tackle things like fungus, bacterial infections, intracellular
uh-huh,
problems. So the problem is when you skew it like this toward T helper cell 2, not
yep,
only are you making that allergic side of your immune system worse, predisposing you to things like asthma, eczema, food allergies, you're also making the T helper cell 1/17 side weaker and less active. So you're
yeah,
predisposing yourself to things like fungal issues. But
uh-huh,
what happens if that fungal issue turns into the hyphae form of candida? And what
uh-huh,
happens if the candilicin damages the host tissues? Well,
uh-huh,
that can actually cause a very big issue and it can skew your immune system further toward the T helper cell 2 response. And then it can become this very, very vicious feedback loop with a lot
yep,
of those cases and people who have like asthma, allergies,
yeah,
eczema. So this was a very major part in my understanding of my own healing. So that's why I'm very passionate about that one. But when you look through it, you realize like you're not just trying to get rid of candida. Like that is absolutely what we're not
right,
trying to do that. What we're trying to do is we're
right,
trying to optimize the environment around it and we're also trying to obviously get it so that that candida can revert back to the commensal form. We
right,
also are trying to improve the bacteria within that environment so that it doesn't go there because it's the same thing with like the whole like idea of like I'm going to tackle the hormones right away, tackle the gut right away. Not quite. We want to work on the system as a whole that's allowing
mhm,
that to happen in the first place. So you want to work on things like your beneficial bacteria diversity. You want to see, are you getting enough butyrate producing bacteria in the gut? Because we know that fungal issues love the large bowel. We also
mhm,
want to see, and by the way, the butyrate is very important for your cholinocytes.
yeah,
Extremely important. It's one of their main fuel sources. So very important to get that stuff in because if you're not thinking about this from a systems physiology perspective, what usually happens is you'll just untangle one part of the web and then it'll go back to where it was. So in order to make like that proper change, we need to truly change the environment. And that's why I say you can't fix a gut, but what you can do is you can improve an environment. So that's like one of my favorite examples to go through with that sort of thing. And then I have a few more as well.
I love that so much. And thank you for shedding light on that part of the system. I have a lot to say about it actually, but to start, I think people need to understand that a healthy gut is hypoxic, meaning less oxygen is better. That's going to help control the yeast overgrowth. And what we have nowadays, and you mentioned epigenetics and environment and all of that, which is important, but glyphosate is a chemical that is a metal chelator. It pulls metals to it. It will do that with manganese. And actually, manganese in the gut is something that regulates this anoxic state. So if you're eating food with glyphosate, laden, whatever, it's got traces of it, you are changing the gut and the entire environment and what can grow and not grow.
Also, it's a mitochondrial toxin. And like the mitochondria producing energy is important for healing. Like, let's just say it like it
Absolutely.
is. Like, you have to be able to produce energy to heal well, and you have to be able to utilize it well. So, like, what if the mitochondria that are helping out with the Paneth cells and the intestinal stem
Yeah,
cells are just cooked? Well, that's a big issue because your Paneth cells, they're secreting some of your antimicrobial
right,
defense peptides.
exactly.
And then you also have the intestinal stem cells. So, like, if something gets messed up on that barrier, it can say, hey, I'm going to go turn in to what I need to help out the barrier. So,
Right.
there can be a lot of big issues just from that big no G word.
Yeah, well, and then the Paneth cells are more in the small intestine,
Yes.
and then you can get the SIBO or small intestinal
Mhm.
bacterial overgrowth, which so many people have
Same if
nowadays.
you have bad bile flow.
Yeah, yeah, right. So yeah, it connects with so many things. I also wanted to ask about autism because I know a practitioner here in Alabama and he's not alone. It's so many of them have found the same thing, that many of their autistic patients actually do have a candida overgrowth. And when you reduce that candida load, their symptoms almost disappear. I mean, they,
Tell you why that might make sense. So, obviously, candida, if you're having like a lot of sugar,
right,
that can turn that into acetaldehyde, which is like the same toxin that you get when you drink alcohol, essentially. So that can travel to the blood-brain barrier, and if it crosses it, which it doesn't always because it's a larger molecule, but if it does, it can actually combine with dopamine to form a neurotoxin called salinosol. And if you
uh,
look into cases of autism, you'll see genetically speaking, there's a lot of issues around the microglia. There's a lot of issues around the GABA glutamate balance, and there's a lot of
right,
issues around just histamine in general. And when that acetaldehyde is able to go in there and just wreak havoc on other areas, it can cause like this exacerbated neural inflammation on top of everything else that this individual might be experiencing. So with that sort of thing, it's like it's so multifaceted, but it is so common to see that sort of thing in somebody who has autism where they have like very poor gut bacteria. They have like all these other like certain traits that you might notice where you're like, that's kind of like showing a pattern here. So
right.
yeah, it's very interesting and it makes you think like, what was it that induced that? And I think we all know the answer. Um,
Yeah,
or we all know
yeah.
like one of the potential contributors. But
Yeah, I think there's multiple factors, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, there's multiple for sure.
And then you're over at Arizona State, so do you know the famous Dr. James Adams? And he works on autism over there.
Don't actually. That's crazy.
Yeah, you gotta look
Oh my
into
God, no,
that. He's
it's gotta
such
be
a cool
better.
guy. Yeah, he's got also like a company on the side that looks at autism and definitely gut health issues. I think they might also have a supplement that they have formed to help with autism. But yeah, they're onto some cool things over there. I'm a
That
big
is
fan.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah, right there.
I wish I could have worked in his lab.
Yeah, oh yeah, that would have
That would
been
have been,
very
oh, that would have been dangerous.
yeah, right? Yeah, it might actually solve some problems.
Be awesome.
Well, yeah, no, thank you for sharing that with us. What are some overall guiding ideas that you give your clients about gut health, like what to eat, what to not eat, like what
Yeah,
are general that people might be able to pick up
yeah.
on?
It depends on the client because I'll get some people and they're just like, yeah, I can eat everything and I have no issues. And I'm
Okay.
like, yes, this is going to be so easy as long as there's no compliance issues.
Yeah.
So I'll just say like 30 grams of fiber a day keeps a lot of problems away. So I tell
Good.
them that. I also tell them like eat the rainbow because you have no idea. Like you're getting polyphenols from like berries, and that's actually very good for your beneficial bacteria. So I'm like,
Yeah.
eat the rainbow, eat your fruits, eat your veggies, eat your berries if you can. Fiber is important. In addition to that, though, let's help out our boy butyrate over here. So if you are making potatoes, for example, and you're cooking them up, try to save as many as you can for the next day. Because if they're sitting in that fridge
Yeah.
overnight, they're accumulating resistant starch. And that is
Yeah.
amazing for our butyrate producers. They love it. So
Yeah.
if you can get like tons of and that's why like if I'm cooking starch, I will cook it in bulk every single time.
Okay. That's
There's
a good
no
idea.
there's no instance where I will not cook like rice or potatoes
Yeah.
or like brown rice pasta or something. I will cook that in bulk every single time because I want to continue to reap the resistant starch benefits of that. And because like
Yeah.
you're going on a healing journey, so you're like, I got to implement all this stuff. So in order to make it like as simple as possible and just like a seamless part of your life, that's another part of the reason that I recommend that strategy. But basically, if you're able to do resistant starch, that's going to be another big part of it. Another pretty big part of it, if you can tolerate it, is fermented foods. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like my trifecta for getting like a very good sort of like gut supporting diet on the basis of like the microbiome, for example. Obviously, you're going to want to be getting like enough glycine, glutamine, to obviously support like the layer and those sorts of things. You want to optimize your micronutrient status because I can't even begin to tell you how many processes exist within the gut that are very intrinsically tied to your nutrient cofactor status. So you
Yes.
got to go hard on your nutrition. And what I'll do with people is I'll even start them on an app called Chronometer, and they'll track their food in there. But what it'll do is it'll track all of the micronutrients in their food for the day. So
Oh,
I can see how close to the RDA they're getting for every nutrient.
oh,
So
cool.
I'll look at that for them and I'm like, what are we doing with the thiamine here? We got to fix that. So
Yeah.
I would say the most common one I see though is actually like low folate. Very,
Yeah.
very common, especially in like the animal-based crowd. You'll almost always see like low folate, low thiamine. You'll see very low manganese. You'll see a lot of those sorts of like deficiencies. So
Yeah. Okay.
that's one part of it, right? Like the nutrition. And what I tell people when they're healing the guts is think of healing the gut as like a multi-section exam, and every section's out of 25. So nutrition is one section. Maybe you're at a 13 out of 25 when you start. Based on this information, here's how you can get to 25 out of 25. And here are the things that we can implement over that period of time. And
That's great.
basically, in addition to that, though, we know that the gut isn't just based on food. We know
Mhm.
that we want to support the mitochondria. We know that we want to support the autonomic nervous system. We know that we want to support methylation. We know that, especially with the nervous system, right? Because that very much so impacts things like motility and
Mm.
even digestion too. If you're like
Yeah.
super stressed while you're eating, a lot of people who have like the lower stomach acid issues, they'll notice worsen indigestion and reflux during this time. And that's
Mm.
anecdotal, of course, but I see it time and time again within my client
Yeah.
base, essentially. So that's the big thing, right? Because a lot of people like to treat the gut also like it exists in a silo. And they're like,
Right.
yeah, fermented foods, bone broth, I healed it. No, you didn't.
Mm.
Because we
Yeah.
also, like, if you have a really severe case and you have like MCAS, for example, and I'm
Mm.
working with you and you can only eat like 5 foods like I was able to, you have to go on a journey just to be able to eat those foods again that can actually nourish the gut. So there's like
Yeah.
all these steps that you might have to take. Like I had one dude and he could only have like zucchini, pumpkin, and chicken when he started working
Wow.
with me. It was like 3 foods. And
Mm.
instead of like running an antimicrobial phase where I'm like, I'm going to get rid of these microbes and then help you rebuild new ones, I'm like, I got to work on your nervous system. I got to work
Yeah.
on methylation. We got to work on your mitochondrial health. We got to work on so many other areas outside of that. And even the inflammatory response alone is something that needs to be worked out here. And
Yeah.
the dude ended up obviously living in mold as well. So that was
Mm.
another huge part of the problem. But for every and each case, it's going to be totally different. Like a lot of people think like if I do this for my gut, it's going to work, but it's totally not. Like I had somebody one time and they were like, "How do I heal my guts?" And they're like, "It's so weird, Chris. Like no matter what I do, the only thing that works for me right now is removing all starch." And I was like,
Huh.
"Huh." And go figure, the guy had ankylosing spondylitis.
Oh, yeah.
You probably know this, but if
I
you
know.
have a
Yeah.
Klebsiella overgrowth, that can actually produce certain antibodies that like to go to the knee and the lower back, and they can
Uh,
heavily contribute to ankylosing spondylitis. And the actual Klesbiella loves starch. It loves it so
uh,
much. So I was able to make that connection for this guy's case, and I'm like, this guy probably thinks right now that starch is just like toxic. And
yeah.
basically for him, I'm like, I have to take him through the cycle of re-regulating the nervous system, obviously reworking his microbiome in a way that we can at least get to grow some good stuff, and then even reworking things like the immune system as it's in that state over a period of time. And with these people, I'm always like, it's gonna take like a long time. Like you can't just come in for 3 months and think that it's gonna be gone after that. I'm talking like this can be 1 to 2 years worth of hard work when you're dealing with this sort of stuff. But when you're that sick, like, that sounds like a pretty good thing when you're like, 1 year?
Right.
Oh, great. So with a lot of those people, I'll do that stuff, but all that to say, like, I like to be as nuanced as possible when I do it. I like to treat every single person who I work with, like, as a blank slate, because otherwise it just turns into me giving, like, this generic gut health advice, and that's where, like, the actual, like, diagnostic process and looking at everything, that's where it all comes together and makes Shield of Health the special company that it is, because we're
Yeah.
able to, from, like, the very start of the process to the end, it's able to flow very cohesively into this
Mhm.
nice sort of like flow that guides you to these very like this very good understanding of what's happening in somebody's body, but also this very good understanding of like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do an antimicrobial phase until like 3 months out for this sort of case. So it gives you
Mm.
like a very good idea of kind of the order of operations of things, in addition to like the supports that you do, the elimination diets that you do, the specific nervous system interventions that you do. Like everybody thinks that nervous system issues are just sympathetic dominance, but I can't even
Mm.
begin to tell you how many parasympathetic dominant shutdown clients I get. So
Wow.
there's a very big difference. And if we just sit there and assume that it's sympathetic and we don't look into that, we're not truly helping the human being in front of us.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're assuming the person in front of us based on what's on the paper. So that's why
Right.
it's so important to realize like you have a human being in front of you. You don't have a collection of labs and symptoms in front of you. You have a human being expressing these, and that's why we need
Mhm.
to look deeper than we ever have with this sort of case to get some real
Mm.
answers.
That's so good. I'm glad you said that. Wow. So how can people find you if they want to connect with you? Is there a website?
Yeah,
I know you're on X. That's how I found you.
yeah.
What can you give them?
Yeah, you could find me on my website is just shieldofhealth.com. So that's like if you're wanting to do like work with the company and whatnot, and you have a more complex issue, what we do is we just give like free discovery calls to anybody. So if you're like, am I a good? Basically, the reason for that too is we want to see like, are you a good fit? Can we help you? Because it would be like very wrong if we were to just sign somebody on and say, we don't know what to do. Like we need to do that process where we're making sure that we can actually help somebody and that they also resonate with what we do. Like it's very important that if we work with somebody, we should be in alignment. In addition to that, though, you can also find me on X. It's just at Mitopapi, Mitopapi. On Instagram, you can find me as well. It is at the Mitopapi, Themitopapi. Substack, same thing. It's just Mitopapi, Mitopapi. And then, yeah, I think that's where I mainly am right now in terms of all that
Okay.
stuff.
Awesome. And something I like to ask everyone is we play a game, this or that. So I'll ask you a few this or that questions just for fun.
So,
So yeah, let me know this or that. Beach or mountains?
oh, beach,
I agree all the way. Android or iPhone?
iPhone all day.
Same. I don't know. I don't know about the Androids. I can't
Yeah.
use.
If I see that
No.
if I see that green text, I'm like,
Yes.
I
I'm
don't
like,
like that.
that stinks for you. Window seat or aisle seat?
Aisle seat all day, lower EMFs.
Okay. Okay, there you
The
go.
window seat has the highest EMFs in the entire airplane.
Interesting. Okay. I never thought about it that way.
Yep.
Very cool. And then we'll finish with coffee or tea.
Coffee. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Greek and Italian, so there's no other option.
Oh, there you go. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was just an absolute privilege. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to see the other episodes that come out on this podcast. And yeah, this was
Yeah,
a blast.
we'll stay connected for sure. Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely.